So good morning, welcome to 1 Million Cups. I see a lot of familiar faces. 1 Million Cups, as you know, Kauffman Foundation Initiative, big shout to them. And they think if we can share 1 million cups of coffee, increase entrepreneurship within our communities, then we can grow our economies locally and really develop a good community around entrepreneurs. I'd like to introduce Scott from Change-Based Giving. I was reading about Change-Based Giving and it kind of hit home to me. It seems like whenever there's an impoverished region that not only socioeconomically are they really disadvantaged, but also there's a high level of pollution, the water sanitation might not be great. There's a lot of kind of factors that play into this. And Scott, through his experience with helping run different camps in Colorado and Mexico City, working with different people, some people seeking asylum, he's really kind of lived this problem, and that's what brought him to this solution. But I won't say anything more. I'll let him come up here and kind of give his story. But it's really something that should be on the forefront of all of our minds as we're kind of going to this, global slumming. There's certain parts of the country or certain parts of any country around the globe that are really kind of just getting the short end of the stick. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Scott.
Y'all hear me okay? Yeah. So thanks for inviting me to Million Cups. It's a great opportunity for Change-Based Giving to have an opportunity to reach out and get some feedback, have a conversation. I was going to start by telling a story. I remember kind of, I was riding in the back of a van on our way to our destination, and we had gone miles and miles on sort of a pothole-ridden, riddled roadway, and my stomach was starting to churn as we finally arrived at our destination. And really, this had a lot to do with, it is a very difficult travel to get to where we were going in Mexico City. And I remember just, as I said, I wasn't feeling well, and as I stepped out of the van, and when we arrived, I was sort of greeted by and assaulted by this strong gust of wind that was full of dust and dirt, and frankly, probably some fecal matter from stray dogs that were sort of floating around in the community. And that was really my first introduction to this slum community called Chimalhuacan, which is in sort of the eastern part of the Mexico City basin. A little community. Well, it's actually not a little community. It's about 1 million people. Only about half of whom, 500,000 of whom, are really counted as officially living there by the municipality. And it's really one of the largest slums in Latin America. And I think that, that the residents, it's telling you a little bit about the residents of Chimalhuacan, their experiences are not really that much different from lots of other slum dwellers in the world, that they find themselves subject to exploitation by corrupt politicians and police. Full-time employment is scarce, very difficult to come by. That means about 80% of these people are trying to find employment in the informal sector. Most of them do not have secure land tenure. A lot of the families that they come from are, I guess, what we call disintegrated because of migration patterns, because of domestic abuse. And all of this really sort of leads to a continuing cycle of poverty. And so I reference just this experience that I had in Chimalhuacan, because I visited this place on many occasions. And it really is sort of key to understand the genesis of change-based giving. And I have a friend who runs an NGO in Mexico City. That's one of the reasons that I was there. And on his team, he has a person who's from New Zealand, who's an architect, who's just spending some time with him. And what he's developed is a small, really cheap, sort of mini solar hot water heating system that can be built and installed by youth that live in this neighborhood where the NGO works. And on one occasion, after meeting with him and talking to him, I came back to Arkansas, and just in a very informal way, I was trying to raise a little bit of money for him. But as I was doing this, I was bothered by something I really couldn't dispel. And what was bothering me was that I was going around asking people for money for an environmentally sustainable sort of concept. But the context in which I was raising the money sort of in a comparably affluent North American setting, was not a place where people were really putting a high priority on simplicity and sustainability. Or again, maybe to put it differently, I felt like there continued to be a disconnect. I was going around trying to, again, raise money for ecological and socially sustainable projects. But I was asking, again, money from people, and I'm not putting myself, just by the way, I want to make sure this is clear. I'm not an environmental saint. I'm not a sustainability saint. I'm probably like everyone else. I think about these things, but I probably don't think about them as intentionally and carefully as I should. But so I'm asking people for money to do ecologically and socially sustainable things over here. But again, our lives, my life, it's not always marked and characterized by a real intentional lifestyle and maybe thinking about sustainability and simplicity and those kinds of things. And so that's really kind of where the idea of change-based giving was born, was kind of try to wed these things. Instead of just kind of doing sustainability over there, ecological and social sustainability projects, maybe in the way that we raise the money, that we would attempt to leverage small, so essentially what we've done is we developed a web tool, and what we do is we help people identify small, practical actions that they can take that promote sustainability and simplicity in their own lives and their own communities. And then we help them track the resulting savings from those small little changes, hoping that they will donate some portion of that to those savings to our urban slum projects. So that's the basic concept. And maybe what I was going to do, I have a Prezi here, and try to articulate some of the distinctives about change-based giving. So we can kind of think about this in a problem-solution format. And so I'm going to give you 3 problems, one of which is, I'm calling this the slumification of the planet. I don't know if any of you, there are lots of books right now. There's a vast secondary literature on the slumification of the planet. There are all sorts of books like Planet of Slums and a zillion titles that have slums in them. But what you see is that there are currently 1 billion people living in urban slums, and some experts believe that by 2050, 1 in every 3 individuals on the planet will live in some sort of urban slum, which to me is sort of a mind-blowing statistic. I don't know if that's something that is familiar to you all, but this is something I've been learning about in the last several years, and so this is one of the problems. The second problem is pretty obvious, is environmental degradation. Kind of take your pick of what kind of flavor of environmental degradation that you think about or are aware of. Deforestation, depletion of fisheries, emptying of aquifers, acidification and pollution of oceans, it goes on and on and on, loss of soil fertility. We all know there's a whole panoply of things that, and problems that we're facing in terms of environmental degradation. And the third one, this may not in your mind be a problem, but again, going back to the story that I told at the beginning, is something I've been thinking about more and more, and that is giving is unrelated to personal sacrifice and life change. And that kind of leads to a disconnect between the donor and the communities of need. I just want to say sort of the baseline proposition that I think that giving of any kind is good. I appreciate that I have so many people in my life that are very generous with their money. And so I just want to make it clear that I'm not judging any of us in terms of the way that we give our money. I think giving is always good. But sometimes, I guess, what we'll see here is what we're trying to think through is maybe there's something besides just hit the donate button or just write the check. Although a lot of people don't write checks anymore. I guess we just kind of do that on transfer online. So if you kind of think about this in a problem-solution format, so in terms of the slumification, what we're trying to do is we are focusing specifically, the only projects that we promote are projects that are urban slum-based projects. And I'll talk a little bit more about why that's important. In terms of environmental degradation, what we're trying to do is promote stewardship, good old-fashioned traditional conservative stewardship, sustainability, community and individual well-being. And instead of passive giving, just hit the donate button, giving based on personal change, something that's more meaningful and creates at least potentially some solidarity with communities in need. so that you're maybe taking some action, maybe deciding once a week to ride your bike to work, for example. You don't have to ride your bike, that's just an example, right? You're actually putting some skin in the game. There's some sort of, by you taking an action, you may not get on a plane and fly to Nairobi, you may not get on a plane and go to Calcutta, but you're actually doing something intentional here that's having an impact somewhere else. So one way to think about this, at least as we're trying to map this for people, is that change-based giving is distinctive because of its philanthropic model. And again, I know I already said this, but I just want to, all giving is good. So we're not down on any kind of giving. But if you can think about this as sort of in different ways. Traditional giving, put the check in the mail. Then there's kind of consumer-based giving. Look, if you're going to buy shoes anyway, buy Tom's shoes. You spend the money. I mean, and so they're going to, as you know, you buy a pair of Tom's shoes, and I guess they're going to give a pair of shoes to someone else. So, and lots of businesses are integrating into their business model some way. So if I go stay at the Holiday Inn or stay at the Hilton, they're going to give a percentage of whatever I'm paying them towards some sort of philanthropy. So there's a consumer-based giving, or maybe an event activity-based giving, like Bike MS or Race for the Cure. I'm not the world's greatest cyclist, but I love to bike, and so I do Bike MS, and it's a wonderful thing. But it happens unless I just want to travel over the world or the country doing Bike MSs every month, which I can't afford to do. Usually comes up once a year. And so there's certain events. And so our point here is that we're not trying to be about the sale. It's not part of our business model like Tom's Shoes. It's not just a yearly event. But change-based giving, at least the idea of it in theory, is something we're trying to get people to integrate, thinking a little more intentionally. We're not talking about living in a yurt. We're not talking about leaving civilization behind. We're not talking about radical environmentalism. We're talking about simple little things that each one of us can do in our own daily lives in kind of our fairly affluent North American context that could make a difference somewhere else. I also just wanted to say something about our urban focus versus a rural focus. I've already talked a little bit about this statistic that maybe 1 in 3 individuals by 2050 will be living in an urban slum. But one of the questions that's begged here is, there's a difference between, one of the things that's interesting to me, my background, I'm actually an academic, I'm a political theorist, I teach at a small college in Arkansas, I'm not an international development expert. I've been learning about these things recently in the last several years. But one of the things that's fascinating to me is that most of our money in terms of development aid, whether it's private sector foundation aid or whether it is USAID, governmental aid, most of that still goes to rural areas. And again, there's nothing wrong with giving money to rural development projects. I'm not down on that either. The point, though, is that we've had this seismic demographic shift. And so more people are living in cities, and all these people are migrating to cities, yet most of our money is still going to rural areas. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to focus on sort of an urban context. And I don't have my presentation this morning is not going to be real long, because I want to have a conversation here with you all think about this, but just maybe a little audience participation if you're up for it. I don't know. I'm just wondering, one of the reasons this happens is because it has to do with the metrics that we use for poverty and how we define poverty. And my suggestion is, and suggestion of some others, is that we sort of have a skewed measurement, which is the source of why we're giving more money to rural areas versus urban areas. And I was just curious if you had any ideas about how we're mismeasuring what's happening in terms of urban areas and why that might be. I see you.
I mean, being in a very rural state.
Right, right.
We certainly have been the beneficiary of, of that type of thing. I'm just guessing that population density, has and the focus on agri in general, as a production point.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you got to feed people, right? I mean, it's important. But I think when you conjure up in your mind images of world poverty or global poverty, at least a lot of times, those tend to be sort of rural kinds of scenes that come to mind. Just a couple of quick examples here. One of the reasons this happens is a lot of times the poverty measures we use are sort of things like people who live under $1 a day or live under $1.25 a day. Those people are impoverished. Now, as you can imagine, when you move to a city, let's say Chimalhuacan in the Mexico City Basin, you actually, and the reason you're moving to Chimalhuacan is maybe because you are a farmer who is working in subsistence farming, or your farm, you're no longer able to compete for various reasons. I don't want to go into the politics of NAFTA or whatever. I mean, that's why a lot of people end up moving to these cities. The agricultural life is no longer something that can sustain them. So you move to the city, you actually, in the informal economy, can earn more than $1.25 a day. The problem is that the economy into which you're moving is completely monetized. So that lots of things that you were able to just get as resources at hand in a rural area that you didn't pay for. Suddenly, when you move into a city like Mexico City or Nairobi in Kenya, now you get to pay for everything. The rent in your slum shack that slumlords essentially control are incredibly expensive. Water. Most people in slum areas pay 5 to 7 times more for water than we do in North America. From a water truck or from a vendor or whatever that comes from. You have to pay for everything. So you may be making more than $1.25 a day, but you actually are poorer than you were in a rural area. So it has to do with these measurement things. Another just quick thing is that a lot of times you'll look at a city as a whole. You have a lot of middle class and upper middle class folks living in these cities. So the overall average income in a city might be higher. And so if you're an A group, you're looking, well, the average income in Nairobi is X. But actually, if you look at mortality and morbidity rates and malnutrition rates, you find that in lots of these slum areas are just as bad, if not worse, than many poor rural areas. So part of what we're trying to do is say, look, not only do we want to get people to think a little differently about how they raise the money and leverage money and give to some of these projects, we also want them to be thinking about the slumification of the planet and thinking about moving at least some of our aid efforts to these urban slums that have kind of been neglected. I think that's it there. What I was going to do at this point is we're going to throw up our website, and we have a little explainer video. So maybe just give you just a quick, we've been around we got our tax exempt status about 2 years ago. We haven't honestly been doing very much. No one in our group is being paid. And for those of you who are tech folks, we had a programmer that was part of our original team, and he was fantastic. And then, of course, his job got really busy, and he dropped us. And then it took us a little time to find people who are super talented, who would be willing to actually do the programming for free. And if you're a programmer sitting here, you know that lots of people who are talented don't like to do things for free. So we finally found a person who actually works at the University of Missouri. He's part of a huge team of programmers that runs something called the Community Commons, which is a really interesting mapping, community information website that lots of large medical groups and community development groups use. At any rate, so he's been willing to do all of our programming, so that's kind of solved that problem. We literally just opened our website to the public late last summer, so in July. We didn't want to point a bunch of people to our website because we didn't want to have sort of the Obamacare debacle rollout where things crashed, which was probably way too optimistic because not that many people are going to come running to our website anyway. But we just went on Facebook officially about a month ago, started to point people to our website. So we're really at kind of the early stages of this, trying to attract users and getting people to use our tool. And again, I know this isn't cool. I have no problems with Obamacare. I'm just saying I didn't want the website rollout problem. All right, so we have the website. We have a little explainer video. Again, some of you are so much further ahead than I am. You probably realize if you're going to get a decent explainer video, that will probably cost you at least $1,000. You can do a custom explainer video. I can just tell you we spent a lot less than that. It's amazing what you can do with clip art. It's not exactly what you want, but it was a way to get, this is like our version 1.0, but it gives you at least some idea how this little concept works. So. Uh-oh.
there's supposed to be sound.
Yeah, there's supposed to be some.
Hold on one second, you guys. Sorry.
Because I'm on.
One moment. My apologies.
Well, she's figuring that out. You can see that our first project, maybe as soon as you get the sound going, let me know if you get it going. Maybe one of the questions would be, so we don't have a team of 300 field workers all over the globe. Obviously, if nobody in our team currently is getting paid, we don't have money to have a bunch of staff workers doing this kind of thing. So our model, what we've done is it's basically a model of network partners. So we have a trusted person in Mexico City. This individual used to work in the philanthropy performance sector in the United States. So his job, he was the sort of head of Latin America and the Caribbean. And his job for several years was to go around Latin America and that area looking at projects from USAID, from Heifer, from the Ford Foundation, from whatever happened to be. And he assessed those projects, evaluated them, and tried to help people figure out whether it was worth investing in those projects or not. So, and he's now taking over an NGO in Mexico City. So he's our network partner there. And so instead of reinventing the wheel, what we do is it's sort of a win-win situation. We work with his organization. They pitch projects to CBG, to Change-Based Giving. We take those on as CBG projects. We don't really use the name of his organization, but he gets a new funding stream and a revenue stream that they didn't have before. And we essentially have network partners that we developed. We've instead trying to be all things, all people, having projects all over the globe. We've essentially highlighted and honed in on 3 different cities, Kolkata in India, Nairobi in Kenya, and Mexico City, so that we kind of try to have something on each continent. The idea of these network partners is that they will pitch us projects from their NGOs, but they also will vet local NGOs on our behalf, people who have the same philosophy of development. Every person that every project that we promote on our site is heavily vetted. There's a very extensive grant application everyone has to fill out. And got it, right? Okay. It was working.
Is there somewhere else on your website?
Yeah, can we get to it in a different spot?
It's changed from what we.
It was working this morning.
So while we're figuring this out, we'll do some questions while we're figuring this out. So something that I saw a documentary, and it was talking about Haiti and the relief in Haiti, and kind of, I think it was the Red Cross they were referring to, but I think it was like $1 billion went in, and Red Cross subcontracted to one group who subcontracted to 5 other groups, and each group kind of shaved off a little bit of the funds each time. Red Cross contract here, and so it ended up, I think it was like 15 cents on every donated dollar actually went into the community. Is that a problem that you've seen be prevalent? And then what does Change-Based Giving do to kind of combat that, almost trickle-down effect of everybody takes off a little bit for operational expenses until it gets to the actual application?
Yeah, that's a good question. Look, we are not opposed to making money as a nonprofit. We're not opposed to, at some point, hopefully scaling up and being able to actually pay the people who work for us. At this stage, sort of, CBG 1.0, as I said, I have a full-time job, our programmer has a full-time job. It's not, however, the point is that our business model right now, if we have 200 users, we just opened this up in the last couple of months. So we have about 50 users. And we are you started using social media about a month ago. So what we need to do is we need to scale up. We need more users. We need people to actually be not only using our tool. The tool tracks resource savings as well, by the way. So we can say at some point, hey, CBG is not only funding these specific projects, but the CBG community is saving X gallons of water and gas and kilowatt hours and other kinds of things. But what we do is any donation that comes in through PayPal, we take 7%. And that goes to operating expenses. We have to have web hosting. We have other kinds of things. But that means right now, 93% of all donations go directly to our projects. You think you have it?
Yeah, I think so. Oh, come on.
No sound?
Talk through it. Probably speak.
Did the sound just disappear?
All the sound settings are correct, so.
Well, I mean, you can kind of see what this is just doing is trying to give examples of, it takes 3 very quick people through a process of how they can save money. So, maybe skipping a couple a lot of people still eat a lot of fast food. I'm not being judgmental about that. But I mean, maybe, skip a couple of fast food lunches. This is talking about, cable channels. So you get 3,000 cable channels, maybe take it down to 250 or something and save some money. Trying to give people some concrete examples of how a specific person could save money. So this is the first person, just turning down the thermostat. So when you go in, you create a baseline very quickly. You can put your own information in, or you can use shortcuts like national averages for water, or you can just put in Arkansas. It'll tell you what the average utility bill is. You say you're going to turn down your thermostat, and it'll tell you how much money you're saving and stick that in your U profile. This is sort of shower time kind of things. The shower time doesn't yield a ton of money, but it yields 550 gallons a month if you just sort of cut your shower time down a little bit, as you see here. This is about commuting from the burbs. I mean, whether you're going to do a ride share or something like that. So this is our ride share. As I said, this is our clip art deal here. Shopping. So we have basically the transportation part of the tool, shopping, entertainment, and home sort of energy use. Those are the 4 things that every single person uses every week. And so this is just kind of trying to encourage people, maybe eat 1 less portion of meat. Maybe if you're already using some coupons, some of that savings, toss it to CBG. And the third person here in 1 second is somebody who's already doing stuff. So some people are saying, well, look, I already ride my bike to work, or I'm already really environmentally conscious. Well, great. Well, then multiply the good. We'll show you how much money you're saving by these good practices, and then we'll see if we can sort of take a bit of that. So she's already riding her bike to work. She lets our CBG transportation app or sort of tool help her visualize that. The next thing she's going to go through is changing out an old refrigerator. Refrigerators are the worst sort of pullers of electricity, as you know. Changing it out for Energy Star will kind of tell you how much that's going to save you. And this is about just going to a matinee instead of paying full price for a movie. Just giving you some just very practical, as I said, not living in a yurt, things that you can do. And you save 17 bucks per month. If people save $20 a month, we're not asking for the 20 bucks. Give us what you want. I mean, give us 10. You save 20 using our tool, then maybe give us 10, give us 8, give us whatever. And that's basically it. It's a lot better with the with the audio. Oh, no. That's all right. So there you go.
We'll open it up to questions now. Does anybody have? I'll come over here with the mic.
I'm sorry.
Scott, thank you for making the presentation to us this morning. I'm somebody who spent a third of my career outside the U.S. In fact, living and working in Mexico City was one place. But I'm looking at what you have and knowing that the slumization, or whatever the word you used for urban.
Urbanization, slumification, yeah.
Slumification, that was it, slumification, okay. That's really happening in the United States. So do you think you might be able to be more successful if you could connect locally with people who have some sort of affinity to an area already around them, and it might be easier and less costly to start before jumping out into other countries? Just a question.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very legitimate question. I think that the answer would be twofold. One, I think it's an excellent question. This is not the first time that we've been asked that question. And we are very open to starting to think about projects in the United States. And I think that some of the people involved in the project have been folks who spent time outside the United States. And so the intense urbanization and slumification is something that I think is sort of on steroids compared to what you might see at least in many US communities. So even though you have ghetto areas, slum areas, however you want to refer to them in the United States, in terms of the actual levels of poverty, infant mortality, all those other kinds of things, it's just much more extreme in these other areas. So that's why we were sort of focused on that. But yeah, I mean, I think that we would be very willing to say, hey, let's partner with somebody who's doing an interesting project in Detroit. And so that's something that we're thinking about. Another part of that, just that we're also thinking about, is how do you get users? And this relates to the question, though. One of the things we have on our site, if you don't have to pull that up, but when you go to donate, right now the only project we're promoting, because this is just our first rollout, we want our money, we actually want to fund a project and get that out of the way. It's a project in Nairobi. But if you go to our donate button and you click it, it'll give you a choice of Nairobi and there's something called Alto Caimo, which is a project in Peru that is being sort of conducted by a group out in Portland, Oregon. And so one of the things we're also experimenting with is, what if maybe there's a group in Detroit or somewhere else, they just want to use CBG as a platform. So what we do is, we're not going to promote, because we're promoting Nairobi right now, we're not going to promote their Peruvian project, but they can go to their basic, group of people that are supportive of what they're doing, and they can say, hey, try out the CBG tool and sign up as a user, use the tool, see if you can save some money, and then instead of donating to our Nairobi project, they'll donate to, on the drop-down menu, their specific project. And we'll take 7%, but we'll still give them 93%. And we're thinking about trying to work with some other nonprofits, maybe someplace in Little Rock, where we can just get people exposed to our tool. They could use the platform, so this change-based giving idea, as a way just to get some traffic. And so that's another wrinkle on that idea. So, but it's a good question.
Hello. She actually asked a question that I really
Sorry about that. That was very rude.
That's good, but I just wanted to add some things. See, I'm from India originally, so I really understand the slum world, because I, in fact, lived in one of them when I was a kid. So I kind of know how that worked, right? So that is true. One of the main reason why I had the dream to come to United States is what I was thinking, that everybody's really rich over here, so I can get that heavenly feeling, right? Yeah. When I came over here, I realized that we still have poor people. But one of the things I noticed, that we worry too much about outside world, that we don't really worry about what is happening in Louisiana or Alabama, even in all the shelters in Arkansas. Right? We think about Nairobi and Calcutta and the biggest slum in Mumbai, and we always worry about that. The same way our president sometimes worry about Syria, not the people over here, right? Again, no offense to anybody in that scenario. So now, I run a small business here, and I do have international operations. The reason why I brought that up is, when we try to raise money from an investor from Arkansas or from United States, by telling them that, hey, I have international operations and I'm generating revenue and I have things going on in another part of the world, 99% of the people either don't understand it or they don't trust it, because they want to see things happening in the local community. What is your local client? Are you doing business with Walmart? That's all we ask, right? So, seriously. So the same thing may be applicable in your charity organization as well. If you try to go out there and try to raise money by saying that I'm going to fund a slum in Nairobi or whatever, those kind of things, there's always a problem in getting that confidence. And at the same time, you all probably know that in social media right now, things are going on where they're dissecting all the major non-profit organizations, including Red Cross or you name it. Only 1 or 2% of the actual money that people donate really going to them. 99% of them goes to their operation. Salvation Army being the best, non-profit organization where 97% of their money goes to things like that. So there is 100,000 of them out there already taking care of all the outside world. Why don't you just focus locally? So you can gain the trust. I mean, you have, I understand the pain and difficulties, of human being is the same across the globe, but why don't you focus first in the local market before you jump into somewhere else? Sorry for asking that long question, but I had to.
Yeah, no, again, I think it's very legitimate. I think it's good for us to be pressed to continue to think about our model. And another thing I would say, though, is part of what we're trying to do is connect sustainability, the environment, and slums to some degree, and poverty. And I think, in many respects, when the image I conjured up about Chimalhuacán, this place that used to be this verdant, area that was green, and it used to be, when you think about the original Aztec sort of capital of Mexico City, where, there's water, is in a lake, and now it's just this desiccated urban environment. I think the link between poverty and sort of environmental degradation is more pronounced and easier to see. And so we're asking people to think about simplicity and sustainability. In other words, think a little bit about, environmental stewardship and how that might relate to poverty. Sometimes, when I'm talking about in a place like Calcutta or Nairobi or Mexico City, that's much more visually pronounced for people. But that doesn't mean that it's not, that's not going on here.
Very, very interesting concept. To some extent, however, you are doing the proverbial, I'm solving world hunger. And on top of that, you're actually, as you just mentioned, you are saving the planet. So you have like the two largest sets of possible measurable outcomes that there are pie in the sky wise. Given there are so many methods to donate into around the world, how are you very, very narrowly defining your success to your donors and turning around and using that information also from a marketing perspective so that you can prove impact and grow?
Right. And when we get our first project funded, when you go online and donate, I'm kidding. Right. I'm kidding. The hope is that, this is, again, right now it's a small operation. So people go through a rigorous grant application process. They have to tell us up front what their assessment tools are going to be. So, for example, the Nairobi project is, all right, so how many children are you going to do? These are HIV sort of orphans. But specifically, the second part of the social sustainability project, that our first one we have, is income generation, job training, because what we're trying to do is make it so that individuals don't have to maintain an orphan in Nairobi forever. Instead, what you want to do is you want to find existing families, help them sort of generate more income to absorb these kids so that it's a sustainable situation. So the metrics we would use would be things like, if we're doing a number of people served, it might be various income percentages increase in these families that we're working with. It might be the grassroots public health sort of deal, number of people inoculated. We will have, and everyone who applies for us to promote their project has to give us up front several measurable outcomes that we will be sort of holding their feet to the fire to make sure they're doing that, and they have to report to us. So once we get these things funded, then we can start, as we're trying to fund new projects, we can say, hey, here's what's going on in Nairobi. Here's what we're actually doing. Here are the outcomes. Here are the measurable outcomes that we have. But you're right. And again, the big, world hunger, but this, I don't know if it's world hungry, but it is the environment, and it's also has some poverty component to it for sure. The problem is a lot of times people are not connecting these maybe as much as we should. And I think.
Anybody else? Yeah, I got. Where do you see your long-term future for this whole concept? To be internally self-funding doing projects, or to be part of, just to feed the children or something like that, or sell your product into them so they can use that as their money generation?
Right. No, it's a great question, and I think right now, what would be helpful as we're moving forward is figuring out, okay, which direction do we go? In the short run, what we like to do is we like to be sustainable. We get enough users that we can pay for our overhead costs and fund a number of different projects. Now, Is the real future something like change-based giving as a concept, where we start partnering with other bigger organizations and say, hey, let us come in and help you think about change-based giving as a model for philanthropy? We're not exactly there yet. I mean, that's a possibility. We talked about allowing people to use change-based giving as sort of a platform for their nonprofit. And so all of those things are possibilities. I mean, the original vision was just to sort of get to the point where we had users, we were funding projects, and we were doing these projects. But some of these other opportunities or obvious possibilities are out there, and we're not quite sure what makes the most sense. And that's why we're, kind of coming here and trying to figure that out.
I've got a question. So it seems like this is kind of a not opportune time. I feel like this needs to be done, but I mean, with the refugee crisis, there's people that say, I don't give a flying, you know what, I don't even want them in the country. And then there's other people that, there's the big climate change summit. People are mocking that as we don't even need to be doing that. How do you kind of exist in this environment, but then still make people care enough to actually give based on in the environment and based on kind of the summification that they don't see in front of them?
Yeah, I mean, again, excellent questions. I mean, this is always a problem probably with any organization, but specifically you mentioned some contemporary issues that are creating some cognitive dissonance or some interference. The truth is that lots of migration and refugee crises around the world, if we're honest, again, we can debate the science. I'm not saying you have to be a hardcore climate change person or an anti or whatever, but the reality is that climate change is, whether it's human-induced or not, it's real. And it's going to create even more human migration problems. That's why the U.S. Pentagon is, sitting there saying, the U.S. military is thinking ahead in terms of war games and other kinds of things. Here's an issue that's a national security issue for the United States, as we have people moving, not just because Syria is imploding, but because of migration issues, because of drought and flooding and other kinds of things, and rising, oceans, that you're going to have major displacement of people, which, as we can see, is creating enormous political problems. So I do think it's very practical. It's not just unrelated to what's happening in Syria. And again, I think for me, I happen to inhabit a weird world. Okay, so I have friends that are, and that, again, trafficking in it politically here, super lefty, super righty, people that are people of faith, people that are not people of faith. And I'm kind of in an intersection among all those. But I honestly think, regardless of where people fall on the political spectrum or the spiritual spectrum, that there are people of goodwill that can see. So for a conservative person, I say, look, this is just good stewardship. This is taking care of your money. This is, I know that you care about people. You care about the least of these. Here's a very concrete way to do this. And again, people on the left who care about sustainability and these other kinds of things. I think there is a middle ground where I think the problem with a lot of people have is these crises are so huge. You talked about Syria, you talked about climate change. Pope Francis, I'm not Catholic, doesn't matter. Pope Francis came out there and he's connecting, saying, look, there's poverty, there's slums, and there's climate change, and there are actually a lot of people listening to him. The question is, how do you operationalize that? Yeah. Like, oh my gosh, we have climate change, we have the Syrian refugee crisis, so what in the world do I do? Well, I can't do anything. And the whole point is change-based giving, to say, well, here's our little tool, and just do something, like turn down your thermostat, take a shorter shower, walk to work, ride your bike, eat less, maybe eat less meat, shop a little more responsibly, do some things that you can do very easily that actually, if we crowdsource that, can make a difference. So it's trying to give somebody, an answer to, what do I do in the face of all these big problems?
Yeah,
So,
well, and I think you hit on a good point. Each different stakeholder group has their own heartstrings, right? They have their own, whether it's good stewardship, whether it's environmental protection, and you can find what you need to kind of not sell that person on, but kind of what to convince that person of.
In
So
theory.
we'll close it up here. That was an excellent presentation. One ask, and it can be anything you want, but one ask that anybody in the crowd can help you with to advance, anything that's going on with change-based giving.
Yeah, well, again, just take this opportunity to say thank you for letting me come into this context and have a conversation. Thanks for listening and asking good questions and taking it seriously. As most of you know who are entrepreneurs or people in the business world, something that's really valuable is have people actually willing to listen, and sit through a presentation like this and to give you good feedback. So I really appreciate that. I would say, at a basic level, two things. One is just, it would be great if people would go to our site, www.changebasedgiving, and consider just all you have to do is throw in your email and you can become a user. There's no obligation. There's no monetary obligation. You can just play with our tool. You can actually use our tool to save money and not give us any money, which doesn't sound like a great business pitch. But I mean, but the point is that, you know, use the tool, play with it, see what you come up with. The second thing is that we do need to, you know, change-based giving is not going to be for everyone. We think that probably a lot of people who are just starting to make money. I work with college students all the time. College students are not a great market. They're not having to pay for their water, their electricity. They're in a dorm and they're just like using it. Oh, right. They don't really care. But young professionals who are out there who just are starting out, they're starting to make some money. They're having to pay their rent. They're having to pay their utility bill. But they also want something more than just maybe just hit the donate button. They're more willing to engage in this sort of active philanthropy. So I guess what I'm asking is if you can think of groups or target audiences for us, or people within, you know, your sphere of influence that might be good people for us to reach out to. One of the things we're trying to do is add like a groups button so that maybe your, you know, it's a church group or something from your synagogue or something from a civic group could say, hey, let's take a challenge for three months and we'll all use change-based giving. And we can kind of see each other as a group and see if we can sort of raise, you know, $200 or something for this particular project. So helping us tap into and finding people who actually might be sympathetic to what we're doing, because we realize it's not for everyone, but that would be helpful.
Well, everybody give it up for Scott. An excellent presentation. So thank you all for coming out. We are having another 1 Million Cups next Wednesday. It's actually a 2-for-1. We're having two kind of Arkansas-based companies come that are both clothing and retail. One's more clothing manufacturing, the other's clothing retail focused. So if you know anybody, I haven't asked, and I don't have an ask, I'm not supposed to, I don't think. But next week, if you know people in the retail space, the clothing, boutiques, that type of thing, just shoot them a Facebook message, say, hey, there's some interesting people. I think you'd enjoy this 1 Million Cups next week. And so that would be a small ask, I guess, from us. But again, thanks to the Kauffman Foundation, thanks to organizers. Retweet the social media, hashtag it, get change-based, some coverage, some Twitter activity. But again, thank you guys for coming out and have a good Wednesday.